And we're live.
Hello, and welcome to Hershey Area All Things Diversity. Our topic tonight is From Ageism to Collaborageism. I'm Amy Ziegler. I'm the director of the Hershey Story Museum and the Hershey Gardens, and a member of our diversity group. Hershey Area All Things Diversity is a free series of programs to create awareness and promote acceptance and inclusion in our community. It is coordinated by representatives from Derry Township, the Hershey Story Museum, Derry Township School District, Milton Hershey School, the Hershey Company, Penn State Health, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, and Hershey Trust Company. The events are sponsored in part by the Hershey Company, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, Penn State Health, and the Giant Company. Tonight, we're pleased to have as our guest Phyllis Weiss Haserot. Throughout the presentation, please put your questions in the chat on YouTube and we will share them with our speaker. Susan.
Thanks, Amy. My name is Susan Court. I'm a member of the Derry Township community and also a proud member of Hershey Area All Things Diversity. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's our pleasure to be speaking to you tonight about the topic of ageism and to introduce our speaker. Phyllis Weiss Haserot, the cross-generational voice, is a facilitator, marketing business development strategist, speaker, podcaster, and best-selling author focused on the business of uniting people, purpose, potential, and profits across the generations at work. She is the foremost workplace champion of cross-generational conversation. Phyllis brings multi-generational perspective, curiosity, extensive marketing, and conflict experience to help organizations solve intergenerational challenges with both clients and external stakeholders, and for internal teams in order to achieve greater harmony, productivity, and profit. Fostering inclusion and belonging has always been a part of her work since an early career as an urban planner. Over 3 decades as president of Practice Development Council, Phyllis has been a trailblazer as both business development consultant to professional service firms on multi-generational workplace solutions. She is the host of Legacy Makers at Work podcast and the author of You Can't Google It, it's a great title, Embrace GENgagement and the Rainmaking Machine. And she is going to talk to us tonight about the attributes for various generations and also provide advice for all of us to appreciate and value our generational differences. It is our pleasure to welcome Phyllis to Hershey All Things Diversity from her office in New York City. Hi, Phyllis.
Hello, I am thrilled to be here. I think this is such a wonderful program that you do. And I have, I'm bursting to share a whole lot of things. So let's go.
That sounds good. Let's start out by telling us a little bit about what you think the learning objectives are for tonight. What should everybody take away from tonight's session?
Well, here I have 5 takeaways that I was thinking of, and if you can really get a pretty good grasp of 2 or 3 of them, that would be wonderful. All of them, is a bonus. So just to let you know what maybe you should be looking for. First, understanding of who and what ageism hurts, and why it makes no rational sense economically. Then what is behind the ageism of each generation? The concept of authentic age, something I've been talking about for quite a while, and how it can help people to advocate for themselves. What collaborageism is, I will explain that, and action steps to start confronting and eliminating ageism, including what I think is a must-have of psychological safety. And lastly, the intersectionality of diversity factors and why generational age, DEI and B, is what I think is the missing piece at the DEI table, and why it deserves a more prominent role.
Great. So I think a good place to begin would be by defining ageism, because it is certainly not just biased toward older people.
No, it isn't just a bias toward older people. And in fact, I find that the things I'm saying about it really resonate with the younger generations a lot. And, you know, as I like to say, even babies are aging every day. So the people who are in the middle, if they haven't been touched yet, are in danger of being threatened by this too. And ageism is usually described or defined as discrimination against people of a certain age. But it's also things like microaggressions and things that people say. It's not just the legalities of it, or being denied a job or kicked out of it or forced out of a job. So it's tangible, intangible, and greater or lesser hurts coming from that.
Phyllis, can you give an example of maybe something tangible and also something intangible? So, you know, a real aggression versus maybe an unconscious bias that somebody may carry against somebody because of his or her age.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the tangible ones that people are very aware of is if they feel like they're forced out of a job, or they're not given the responsibilities they should have, or those are taken away from them. And I think everybody should be able, as long as they're productive, to be able to work as long as they want. But that doesn't mean that you have to be in charge all the time. We have to leave room for people to move up, to mentor, to coach them, so that they can really take over those responsibilities very well and know what they're doing and be confident about it. And on the younger age, you know, as I said, being able to move up and get the mentoring and the help and the support and sponsoring and all those things that they need to have to be the best leaders or the best, you know, it can be revenue enablers. It's not even only the people who are actually bringing in the business and doing what you can send out bills for in a business, for instance. So those are tangible. And the intangible are, you know, again, it's language very often. It can also be body language. It can be, you know, any means of expression. But, you know, to be, you know, even as a joke, calling people who are over 50 or 70 or 80 or whatever you want to say, geezers, you know, or even older people calling the younger people kids, and especially if they can hear it happening. So there are things like that. And even criticizing how people dress or anything about their behavior that they find hurtful.
You know, we were talking this week when you and I got together and with Amy, and we were kind of chatting about this topic that we cover a lot of different topics, you know, maybe diverse populations and things that are visible. You know, you can see race, you can sometimes, you know, understand the differences in religions, but this one, ageism, is probably one of the more less obvious, I guess, if you will, you know, diverse categories, but yet it's something that touches everybody, whether you're young, old, or in between, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So what is it about ageism that people don't understand, and why does that feed then the biases or unconscious biases?
Well, I think they don't realize the value of people of all different ages and how for creativity and productivity and innovation, all of those things, it's so important to have people of all kinds of differences. And one of the reasons that ageism, or eliminating it, has not gotten as much attention as racism and gender and LGBT now, and even disability now, and some other differences, is that there hasn't, I'm surmising, there hasn't been a scandal yet. Lynette and I were doing various things in Cornell, and they wanted to do more. And the next thing is you got Me Too. And not only, in that particular instance, but Me Too took over everything. And suddenly organizations had to focus on that so much. And it's, certainly with George Floyd and all that, racism, all those things are extremely important. But I think that age, generational diversity and the different attitudes of the generations informs and influences attitudes and behaviors about all of the other differences that there are, including difference of thought, you name it, all of those things, to at least some degree. So it looks to me like the umbrella of all. And I, hope if that hadn't struck you, that you give some thought to it.
So there are a lot of stereotypes about younger people, which is ageism, I think. How do we help people understand that it's not a harmless joke, but can negatively impact people and your interactions with people? For instance, for years, people, make collective statements about millennials. And I find it interesting because a lot of the people that they're being negative towards aren't even millennials anymore. They're, Gen Z or whatever. So what is a good way to kind of call that out and get people to understand that it's not helpful to be doing that?
I think that the leaders in organizations need to realize that people need to have more interaction with people who are different. And if it's age and generations, they have to give people time to have and encourage cross-generational conversations. That's, I'm really big on that. And in my book, You Can't Google It, is all about that and examples. So there's so much focus on productivity, and there's so much pressure to be working all these hours. And that's what people are doing because that's what they're rewarded for in one way or another. But we need to find ways, and I can suggest various ways, but find ways to give people time and encouragement to get to know people that they don't really know as people, as humans, what interests they have. Very often, there are people find that somebody who's decades different in age shares a strong interest with them. But how would they know? Because their interaction, and in a work situation anyway, is mostly, and I would say 95%, if not more, very often, about the work and what their tasks are.
It sounds like similar advice, that we offer when we talk about the other kinds of diverse groups and just breaking down those barriers and getting to know each other. But Phyllis, talk a little bit about the stereotypes of the different generations. I mean, I personally have never identified with the the group that I'm in, and probably a lot of the people watching this feel the same way. Do those stereotypes help feed the bias that we might carry against people?
Yes, of course. And I think, it's not always stereotypes. It is that too, but people don't know what to think, and they hear things, and sometimes they're ridiculous and not anywhere in reality. And for one thing, we define generations actually not by birth years. You can have two people who have the same exact birthday, but maybe they were brought up in different countries, or they have different family backgrounds, more progressive or conservative, more religious. Customs are different, so cultural things. So we really define, and it started out this way before the Census Bureau came up with years that I don't 100% agree with for some of them, that it's the economic, social, political, and cultural things that were going on at a similar time that people experienced. So that's one thing. And it could also be, where they are in a life cycle that determines that. Or if you have two people who started out working together and one becomes the manager of the others, they're going to have different priorities and responsibilities. So all those things are important. I consider myself cross-generational. I mean, I have to say, if somebody's, defines it by chronological, that I am a boomer. But I relate strongly to 3 generations. I'm not sure about the Gen Z. I like them, and I really have a lot of faith that they're going to be able to do good things because they're very dedicated to what they're doing. But the stereotypes and silly things like how you part your hair, and are not useful. And they have developed because somebody who has some influence starts pointing out those things. I mean, calling millennials entitled really bothered me a long time. And I would say, well, the older generations think that they're entitled to be in charge forever. And if that's not an entitlement, and also that they should be making more money all the time just because they've been around, even in a bad economy, and I've seen that going through recessions. So we've, got to point out and say, get to know people, question stereotypes that you hear.
That sounds like good advice for everybody. What kind of responsibility should we all take as individuals to make sure people know who we are beyond our generation, beyond our category, if you will?
I think it's really important to reach out to people. And what I find when I talk about this, people will say, I talk about cross-generational conversation. Well, they say, well, who should start that? I say, what about you? But people, especially in the last 5 years, I don't know. I mean, this has just been growing, but with all the dissension that there's been and divisiveness, people are afraid to speak up. And that's one of the things when I talk about psychological safety, It really means that people know that they have permission to say what's on their mind, and they're not going to get fired or punished in any way for it in a business. And just to be able to express opinions. I mean, respectfully. I don't mean that they should say nasty things or conscious aggressions, but that they say, let's discuss this. And it's all right if I'm hearing something that I don't like and it offends me or hurts me in some way, that I point this out to you. So people have to feel they have the freedom without that punishment and to allow themselves to be vulnerable.
You mentioned that you identify with 3 different generations. So I'm curious, it made me think of when you were talking about the concept of authentic age. What is that and how can we use it to our benefit?
So authentic age, I developed an assessment, which still is not on my website, or such, but it's the Boston University has an institute about society and age, and I think it was in 2010 they came up with something called Prism of Age. And I found this fascinating. And what it is defining age in 10 different ways, and chronological age only being one of them. So there are things like even how you think of yourself, how other people perceive your age, your age of tenure. In other words, how long have you been in an occupation, or how long have you been in a particular job? Your fitness and wellness, or health and fitness. And there are some others as well. And what I did was I came up with a bunch of questions under each of 8. Chronological isn't in there because we know more about that. And with 8 of them. And in answering these things, including how you're perceiving yourself or you perceive age, you can come up with a document that helps you advocate for yourself if you're trying to retain a job, to get a job, and in other instances and uses that you may have for it. So that's it. If you want to know more of it, some articles, they got a lot of play for a while. This was some years ago. And due to things that were going on in my life, I never actually got the assessment so that it's on the website that people can take it yet. I hope to get it to it soon. But if you'd like to know more, just contact me. I'm happy to share my contact information or have you guys do that.
No, that would be great. And how would you say we can all do better to understand each other so that we can have stronger communities and stronger workplaces? Because it sounds like if we're all making these assumptions that somebody, who is older perhaps can't do a certain job, or conversely, somebody who's younger is only suitable to do a certain job because he or she is younger, that's not going to build healthy communities and healthy workplaces. So how can we kind of build that ongoing dialogue so that we don't focus so much on that bias, either consciously or unconsciously?
Well, I think that there are plenty of things, articles, books, and all of that people, and other resources that people can get to. And I'm seeing so much, which is I have Google alerts for all these things. So I'm looking at studies all the time and I'm reading articles, and I think there's really been an increase recently. I mean, I even see the attention, my things in my work have increased a lot since the summer. I think that the pandemic had a lot to do with that. We're pointing out we need to be more human to each other. We need to treat people better at work because they don't want to stand for poor treatment anymore. And that's one of the really prime reasons that people are leaving the workplace. And a lot of people in high positions and with really good jobs, and they might even like the nature of the work, but they don't like the cultures. And we got to do something about culture change. So I think that there's plenty if you reach out and look for it. And, again, I'm happy to be helpful about that. Just, ask me questions, contact me, and I'm happy to talk to people. And one thing about how to find out about people is to learn how to ask good questions. Not yes or no kind of closed questions, but that can get them talking comfortably. And most people, even introverts, once you start making them feel important and they see that you're listening, they're going to want to talk and they'll open up to a lot of things, and you probably react the same way. I always say, and that's related to curiosity, which is one of what I call the 10 essential traits and skills for success that I look at through the lens of 5 different generations, and you can't Google it. Curiosity is really important. And in a business sense, say you can't be a good networker or business developer if you're not curious about other people and things, but in your personal life as well. That's how you learn.
We should remind everyone that if you have any questions for Phyllis, you can put them in the chat in YouTube, and we'll make sure that we get the questions to her throughout the session.
And we do have another one from there. If you are trying to attract younger generations to a community or workplace, what are some things to focus or highlight?
For the young people, for anyone really, you have to understand what they're looking for. Right now, the ability to get mentoring and coaching is very important. Culture is very important. They're looking at those things. They care about how they're going to be treated, and they want to know that they have opportunities for growth. Opportunity is really, really important to them. So you need to let them know on a website, on your conversations, and in interviews that you have. So let them know all these things. And using robots and AI for interviews and for looking at resumes is not always the best way to do that. And a lot of young people are really questioning the value of even going to college. Their parents still are concerned about it, especially if they think that one way or another they're going to be able to afford it. But because it's so costly, and they're just wondering, maybe I should just get technical skills of some sort. And when I say that, I mean, like vocational. I don't mean digital necessarily. And interestingly, what employers are saying, and there was recently an article in Harvard Business Review from, with an interview with Linda Hill, professor at Harvard Business School. And in this survey found very much that the 5 top things that employers are looking for now in people is adaptability and curiosity and creativity and comfort with ambiguity. And it isn't until number 5 that digital literacy is ranked. So again, we're getting to more what I call human performance skills, commonly known as soft, but they're not soft. So I like to call them that.
So it sounds like it's a balancing act, though, because on one hand, when we're looking to build stronger workplaces and stronger communities, we need to understand and appreciate our generational differences. But on the other hand, we can't focus so much on them that we're putting people in buckets and stereotyping them and potentially, showing them bias. So how can we as individuals benefit from all of the great information that's built into the generational research that you and many others have done, but on the other hand, not let that impact our decisions, maybe unfairly?
Well, you can't, I think you don't put all your eggs in that basket. You have to consider all kinds of skills and traits and qualities, what fits into your culture, but you don't want everybody to be the same either. So you have to figure out what you're really looking for and then interview for that. And I think that knowing the attributes of the different generations is important information that you need, but those are guidelines. It's not everything. Everything is not generational. As I mentioned, some of the other important influences. So you need to be much more strategic in knowing what it is you're looking for and not just, take out your old job descriptions and say, this is what I'm looking for, because very often it doesn't turn out to be.
Phyllis, we always want people to feel empowered when they leave these sessions so that they can be better allies in the community and in the workplace. Can you maybe give some suggestions, if you're in a situation where you feel like somebody in your conversation or in the room where you are is a victim of bias or unconscious bias, what can we all do to kind of intervene and shift the conversation to make that better for the person who was just impacted and maybe educate the other people at the same time?
Right at that particular instance?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
let's say we're all in a meeting together and somebody says something. What can we do to kind of educate and also alleviate some pressure on the person who was impacted?
Well, it's saying that's, it would be really good to start meetings with the ground rules of psychological safety and, saying respectfully that people are willing to listen to being called out, especially if it's inadvertent. And very often it is. I mean, there's no list of microaggressions or, a whole, and even if there was one, next week it would be different, or somebody would say something the next day and you'd say, oh yeah, that's not on the list, So you've got to be just open to listen, but give people permission to call out things that they don't think are right, whether it's the person who is offended by it or hurt by it, or somebody else who is there. People should not sit by quietly. And I think the younger generations are much more vocal about these things. And also they have so many identities that the older generations either never had or never realized they had. And it's true. I mean, they're more tied to the younger people to these various identities. But also because the population has really gotten more diverse, more people who are, a lot of immigrants. If there were transgender people before in the population, and there were, but probably more of them now, who are allowing, who are being more open about it. So, I mean, there's, just a couple of examples, but there are all kinds of things that people are more sensitive to than they used to be.
And hopefully more enlightened about as well.
Yeah. Well, there are ways, there are courses about these things, there are trainings, and they're not always done very well. And a lot of people will just go and check off a box rather than thinking about it afterwards and how that applies to them. So we've got to take it seriously. It makes a difference. And
So I have a question that's more of a practical, real life example. So how can we assure collaboration and better harmony as more older workers are reporting to younger managers? And one thing that really comes to my mind from experience is communication styles. I think younger generations love to do things digitally and not necessarily pick up a telephone and talk. And older generations, not necessarily because they don't know how to use it, but just because that is their norm, would prefer to do, the other thing. How do you kind of bridge that sort of communication style gap?
Well, I think that at the beginning of the conversation, or when you become teammates, or that relationship is set up, that you talk about, when I say about ground rules here, this is what I'm comfortable with. This is how I work best, and share that. I have something, I've changed the name for it, but it's not, I was calling it a user manual. And it's a bunch of questions that you can answer and then trade your documents, or trade your list with the other person or people, so that they have a good idea of what you like and what you're comfortable with, and also what you would like them to do differently, and just establish that. You see, if you don't, again, it's about asking good questions. If you don't ask, you're probably not gonna know. And if you're being respectful, then you will listen to it, pay attention, say, this is the way we can work more harmoniously. But I think that anybody, whether they're older than their manager, let's say, or younger, should realize that if you report to someone, part of your job is making them look good. And even if you think you know more, and that you know all the things that work and all the proven methods, Well, maybe they have in the past, maybe they have for you, but there may be things you don't know about. And the older or younger person may bring something to the table that is very valuable. So be open to how you can contribute and collaborate best.
I wonder too about, looking for ways to be proactive, instead of listening for instances of unconscious bias or actual bias, is to sort of size up a situation. Like, let's say we're all in a meeting room together, you're with your coworkers and they're all various ages, and a new client is in the room and they don't know the coworkers. They just recognize that they're all different ages. Instead of waiting for that client to question whether the young team member has the experience to do the job or whether the older team member has the savvy to do the job, you could kind of help with introductions, maybe
Absolutely.
to build up their credibility, regardless of where they are on the age spectrum, just to kind of prevent any kind of unconscious bias. I mean, do you think that that's a good tactic? I mean, without calling things out, just to kind of set the stage and level set in conversation?
Absolutely. The more you can say up front to avoid anything coming. I mean, it may be that if it's a new client, you may actually want to send, little bios about the people and why you think that they're going to be very good in their role. They may have expertise that a more senior person doesn't have, for instance, or the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
So even before you're sitting down together or on Zoom together, or whatever it is, you can make that kind of introduction, build them up as an authority or a reason for being part of this, so people are not, in a vacuum about those things. Yeah, very good suggestion, Susan.
So we're all an age, whether that's young, middle, or older. Do you think that because we can all potentially be victims of some sort of ageism, some sort of bias, Phyllis, do you think that this, of all of the different kind of diverse characteristics that we examine, do you think this is an easier one to fix or a harder one to fix? I mean, I don't know that we'll ever eliminate all bias, but do you see this as one that is relatable and therefore easier to fix, or maybe viewed as not as important as some of the others and therefore maybe won't get the attention that it needs?
I think both.
That's a good answer.
Really, I mean, I think it's easier to fix in that people just have to have the will. And maybe, I mean, racism is something that goes back so long that is really a tough one, and people have to have the will there and to look at it differently, but that is, has been baked into this society for so long. Ageism is really newer. I mean, gender also is old, because women weren't allowed to do all kinds of things. And even the boomers remember when, if you were a married woman, you couldn't even get a credit card with your own name on it. And your father had to, or your husband had to sign a lease or anything like that, even if you were running a business. This is absolutely ridiculous. But, way back, elders were really respected. And in some cultures today, and there's still ancestor worship. So it's not as old and as baked into the structure, but it has become in a lot of ways. As we've seen all of these things, and even the laws are not all that clear. there are laws about age discrimination, and people actually over 40, which most of us do not consider old at 40. Millennials are 40 now, and people are still puzzled by them. But it's very hard to prove age discrimination. Ask an employment lawyer. It's really hard because it'll be attributed to, we need these skills and they don't have them, or, something like that. It just, or we need somebody younger because they have connections in new industries and they understand them better. And all those things make sense up to a degree, but it depends how important it is. So it's really been, there are more age discrimination cases, but they are not so easy to win.
Can you talk a little bit before we end about how you think the pandemic has changed our understanding of generational bias? Do you think that it has become, ageism has gotten worse or a little better during this last couple of years?
I think it's probably gotten worse. I mean, this is what we hear, and that's one of the reasons it's getting a lot more attention than it did before. If it's under the surface or not, not as I said, there hasn't been a scandal. That would change things. So, there have been racial scandals, there have been gender scandals, but especially when a lot of people were unemployed earlier in the pandemic. Now, employers are dying to hire people. But there were people who were out of work. They needed layoffs and businesses were closing. So a lot of discrimination, a lot of the isms and stereotypes grew out of fears. And, again, I've got articles about the fears of different generations, and there's stuff in my books too. So if you're afraid that somebody is going to take your job, then these biases can grow. If you're, that's a big one. I mean, I think that the economic fears are, but really worried that you can't understand somebody who's a different generation, or they won't change their habits, or they will only communicate in certain ways. And that's not what you're comfortable with. Those are kinds of fears. There are all kinds of fears for each of the generations.
We have a question that came in actually from one of our committee members asking about explaining the complexity of ageism when differences come into play with intersectionality, which you had talked about before, about how the different generations sort of interconnect. So how can you talk a little bit about that complexity and how we can sort that all out to better understand each other?
Well, when we talk about DEI intersectionality, we really mean how age or any of the differences is all, no person has only one kind of identity. You have Black women and Latino men and LGBT of any color or age, and people who have disabilities that can be any of those things. So it's kind of like a combination of all these differences that everybody has. I mean, there's nobody that only has one. And so it's important to learn, well, what does that mean? How does that affect them? What influenced them to think the way they do, or have to behave the way they do, or choose to behave the way they do?
Well, I love that term that you shared tonight about being cross-generational, because I have never identified with being a baby boomer. I find myself to be way too cool to be identifying as a baby boomer. Just kidding.
Have you chosen one of the others?
No, I don't know. I think I have a little bit of lots of them. So, so I like that term that you came up with. I think that's interesting for everyone to not think of themselves as just being in that one bucket.
Yeah, but even if they do, I mean, a lot of people do think of themselves as strongly related to one generation.
Sure.
That's okay. That doesn't mean nothing about no part of the others. But I did some work with millennial groups, and I remember one guy, Jose Garcia, who was a millennial, and he said he feels like an old soul. I think he related to the traditionalists, which are the older generation than the boomers. And again, it's people's values, it's what influenced them, what they're comfortable with. So that's fine. It's okay, just share that, or don't, but you can.
Well, it's all the more reason to try to understand each other better, because you first have to understand yourself better. So we can start there and then try to ask those questions of everybody for certain.
That's true. And ask the questions of yourself. What are your core values? Do you think they've changed over time? And has the pandemic changed that in any way? And, when we always ask in my podcast, Legacy Makers at work, usually start off with asking people what their core values are and how that's influenced the impact that they have and want to have, and how they want to be remembered at work. And it doesn't have to be at work either. And some of these things, and even personal behavioral styles, can change to some degree over time when you have different experiences and you look at the world differently, and the world is changing. I mean, who have thought? We don't even have to, go into it. Even if we just look at the last 2 or 3 years, or a little more than that. Who ever thought that the things that are looming the largest for us, and many of us on a daily basis, would have happened? So, think about it and how that changes, and what you want to change and what you don't want to continue, and what you can do about it. And if the environment is one thing, or the way people are treated, whatever it is, we shouldn't be quiet, and we should encourage all people to speak up, as long as it's respectfully, not violently. But I think if you try to do that and people get used to the fact that you treat them respectfully, that things can change. Not overnight, but Yeah, I'm really, as I say, in the business of uniting people, purpose, potential, and productivity across the generations. It took me a long time to come up with that, but it is true.
Well, I think that we've exhausted our questions from YouTube, and this may be a good time to close things up. I just wanted to know, Phyllis, if there's anything else, any closing thoughts you want to leave people with before we go. And I know that you mentioned your website a couple of times, if you would want to say what that is.
Okay, and I'll give my email address even. The website is youcan'tgoogleit.com. No apostrophe, of course. Yeah, there's all kinds of information there. You can sign up for my monthly newsletter there on cross-generational conversation and other things that I tie everything to. Also, I am now a monthly columnist for the Thomson Reuters Institute, so that, that's Thomson Reuters Institute.com, I think, where they appear. So I think the sixth one of them actually talks about ageism and collaborageism. We didn't get into collaborageism. So since it's there and I mentioned it, I'll just define that. And I've written a manifesto, so it's drafted. If you're interested in that, you can contact me. Again, that isn't up on the website yet either, but the draft is done. And so I gave you the website. My email address is pwhaserot@p as in Peter, D as in David, COUNSEL.com. And I am open to answering any questions that you may have after this.
Thank you, Phyllis. And we'll make sure we put those things in the follow-up to the people who registered for this session. And we'll also put them in the description on YouTube. So anybody who watches this video after this evening will have access to that information as well. So thank you.
Okay, show you two more things that I want to offer. There are some free offers on my website, and I believe one of them is about older people reporting to younger ones, and a few other things. So there's that. I like to leave, when I'm a podcast guest, a challenge. So I will do that as well. And my challenge is to start off reaching out to people of different generations. So people, especially that you work with, but maybe not on a regular basis, maybe they are even teammates, and start a conversation with questions that will get you to understand them, their interests, what they do with their lives, their families, whatever it is. And try that with 3 people and see how it goes. And, so you will be developing relationships with these conversations. And then if it works out well, as I hope and think it will, then pick 3 more. But you're the one who can initiate and start these conversations. Don't wait to be approached by someone else. Get talking.
Well, we started with this session tonight, so this is a good first step, and that's a great homework assignment for everyone. So thank you so much for joining us, Phyllis. It was really a pleasure to speak with you tonight.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I could talk about these things forever, and I intend to. not on one program, but I I feel very passionate about this, and I have liked the parts of my career before, other focuses before 2005, when I really got focused primarily on generational things, because I find it fascinating. I always liked that, but I didn't know what passion felt like in your work. And since I've been doing this, I feel very passionate about it. So thanks for the opportunity. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you. That comes through loud and clear for sure. So thank you, Phyllis. And we wanted to let everyone know that our next session will be on May 18th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And we're going to be talking about how adults can support LGBTQ plus youth. So you're going to want to join us to listen to Lindsay Luz with the LGBT Center of Central PA about how to understand and support LGBTQ plus youth in your life. And the session is going to cover basic terminology and language, practical recommendations for providing tangible support to LGBTQ plus youth, and local resources as well for young people and their parents, teachers, and other trusted adults. So you're not going to want to miss that. Again, May 18th, and we'll be sending out some information so you can register for that session.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fascinating, because we've done this. We've had that training from Cornell, President's Council of Cornell Women, which I'm part of. And there's just so much to learn. It's very rewarding.
Yes, two more things before we go. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank the Hershey Company for the wonderful gift baskets they always provide to our speakers. And this was no exception, so thank you for that. And also I wanted to mention that we will be putting in the chat a reading list that was put together by the Hershey Public Library. So be sure to look at that and check out those books at the library. That is all we have for tonight. Stay tuned for an email about our May program. And thank you all. Thank you, Phyllis.